So especially if your children are in public schools, this is the population of other students they're being exposed to. And 25% of high school students are using it weekly. So pretty frightening statistics. 40% of high school students will try some drug, and 15 to 18% of high school students use marijuana on a weekly basis. And in my work, again, I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I see a lot of children, I see a lot of teenagers, and the young people that I see generally come in with social problems, emotional problems, behavioral problems, difficulty functioning in school, difficulty functioning with their families. It is the rare teenager that comes into my office who hasn't used drugs or hasn't at least tried it. It's mind-boggling. It's so much that I'm surprised when they say no, and it never surprises me when they say yes, because it's so common and prevalent in today's society. There are a lot of questions that are being asked by Muslims, because unfortunately I think some of these sicknesses are in our community as well. I can tell you that I don't see as many Muslims in the practice as I do non-Muslims. I don't think it's because we don't have these issues. I think, unfortunately, we're not as good at addressing them. And I don't think parents know the resources or know how to seek help for their children. So I think, unfortunately, that may be more the reason why I see less Muslims. I wish it were for other reasons. But everyone is asking why. Why is it the case that we're seeing these issues? Substance use, promiscuity, delinquency, school dropouts, violence, gang involvement. There are a lot of questions being thrown about why this is happening. And there are a couple of theories and ideas about why that might be the case. One is that we're seeing increasingly in a society where most households depend on both parents working. So parents that are out of the house, not available to their children, and where this has become much more the norm and the accepted norm. If you actually rewind the clock 50, 60 years, that wasn't the case here in the United States. And in fact, people enjoyed a better quality of life than they do today, when most families actually have mother and father working. That being said, given that mom and dad are both out of the doors, children are provided increased freedom, increased liberties, and there's decreased support and supervision. So it's a setup, and it's a bad setup. And the exposures are so much more dramatic. If you look at mainstream media here in the United States, if you look at the kinds of shows on television that are marketed towards children and adolescents, and you look at the content, very quickly in 5 minutes you'll see that there are overt and covert messages that you don't want your child exposed to. And it doesn't take very long. This is the Family Channel, the Disney Channel, whatever it is, whatever title it may have, the content is not appropriate and not what you would want to expose your children to. And children in mainstream society today are exposed to increasing content that is not appropriate for their age group. That's really much more appropriate for much older individuals, and from our perspective, from the Islamic perspective, content that no one really needs and no one should be exposed to. And yet, increasing amounts of it are filtering through and going to younger and younger audiences. That's true not only for television, but the phenomenon that's really taken effect, I think, in our lifetimes is the internet. And that's a very dangerous place, especially if unmonitored and unsupervised, in terms of what exposure children have. Not only to content, but who is out there and in a position to be harmful to children. And then finally, you just have to drive into Manhattan to see the billboards and the kinds of advertisements that people are exposed to of all ages, and many targeting children, again, with inappropriate content and messages that you would not want your children to have. So those are some of the reasons that are thought to contribute to this phenomenon. And we'll talk more about the opposite. So what prevents the problems with delinquency, substance use, premarital, physical relationships? What prevents those things? What's the ounce of prevention? And generally, I think a lot of people would think good parenting, right? If you're good parents, that will do the job. And research seems to indicate that that is in fact true. That good parenting is in fact the barrier to all of these things that can creep in and take over children's lives. And good parenting reduces delinquency, reduces all of those statistics that I mentioned to you. In fact, if you look at households that are reported to have good parenting, support, warm interactions with children, and a lot of supervision and control, you actually cut the statistics in half, which is a significant intervention, especially if you're looking at a secular population. This isn't a population of individuals who necessarily have an adherence to a faith or a moral code. So it's an extremely successful intervention. Research seems to indicate that there are two dimensions of good parenting. And those two dimensions are warmth and control. So we should talk a little bit about what the heck do you mean? You mean keep the temperature of the house up to a certain, keep it at 80 degrees all the time? I mean, is that the answer? So obviously that's silly, it's not the case. Warmth has a lot more to do with the affection that you show your child and your ability to express love and do it generously and without being stingy. And it also includes being Can the sisters hear? Okay, inshallah. So I was talking about warmth, right? And it's not just a matter of telling your children that you love them. It goes beyond that. Of course, telling them that you love them is very important. Again, it should be done generously. But it's also accepting of your children. And when I say accepting, I don't want there to be any misconception about what that means. It doesn't mean that you tolerate inappropriate behavior. It means that you accept them even though they may be very different from you. So you might have been a football star in high school and your child may be uncoordinated and doesn't even know how to hold a football, but you love him and you support him and you figure out what he loves, which might be soccer, and you're okay with that. That's another deep example, but it gives you a sense that no matter what your child is, if it's halal, it's acceptable in Islam, then you will learn to accept. Because there are going to be innate traits that all of us are born with, temperaments, and they don't necessarily match. Your child may be more like your spouse, or vice versa. So that support, that acceptance is also an important part of warmth. So in a relationship with high warmth, parents and children enjoy one another's company, they're accepting of each other. Parents provide their children with a high level of security, which of course comes from being loved and accepted. Parents and children describe themselves as close to one another. And children indicate that their parents listen to them and respect their opinions. Now, listening and respecting opinions, so there's layers to that. Your 3-year-old doesn't have equal say about what you do, day to day in your home. If the 3-year-old did, you'd probably all just be jumping up and down all day long, and that wouldn't be very effective, or for the child or for the rest of the family. It does mean that children will have increasing levels of autonomy, decreased levels of control from parents as they age and progress, especially through adolescence. And it also means that no matter how old they are, you take them seriously, you hear them out, and you find ways to express whether you agree or disagree in a polite and respectful way without demeaning them. The idea is not to shoot your kids down. We should be their biggest supports, and we should really try to build them up. If you shoot them down, you're not really encouraging them in anything, in any way of success in life. And inshallah, we want our children to strive for success in this life, inshallah, and in the hereafter. So you really want to build them up, and shooting them down is the wrong approach. So it's acceptance, providing that support, listening and hearing them out, and then gently correcting them is the way, or helping them to see how a different perspective might work better. Again, the older the child, especially if you've got a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old, there'll be more of a discussion and more of a hearing out and willingness to compromise. The younger the child, hopefully, we know better than our 3 and 4-year-olds and can really be in a more directive position, again, in a gentle, loving way. In a relationship where you don't find this warmth, where the warmth level is low, where